Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. Our guest today, let me start by saying I'm lucky we got the recording started because we were talking about so many interesting things. I just could have kept going on. Andrew Kolikoff. We'll go through his background as we progress. Suffice it to say, I think, Andrew, you and I are aligned and see things in a very similar fashion. Andrew currently makes his living and occupies, I think, the space he was always meant to by helping others kind of figure out what leadership's about, what it's like to be responsible, not just to yourself, but the people around you, and how we can all kind of manifest the best versions of ourselves. Andrew grew up in New York, hence the Jets hat. And I've already expressed my condolences for that and comment on how brave he happens to be. Graduate of Hofstra with 3 majors, a couple of graduate degrees. And Andrew, why don't you pick it up after those last degrees, environmental science and waste management? Because it just seemed between 5 areas of study, between undergraduate and graduate, you were qualified for a variety of things. Why don't we start your journey with what happened after you graduated and picked up those graduate degrees? By the way, welcome, and I'm thrilled to have you as a guest on the show.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I'm glad we made the opportunity to chat for, about a half an hour to get to know each other a little more before we jumped into this. I grew up in this remarkable home, and we can talk about that more, and that's what really shaped me. But back then, I'm 62 years old, all we thought was that you looked for a good job with good pay, right? And I think what you and I both know, Gary, is that most people very young, we decide what we want to do with our lives when we don't even really know ourselves that as well as we should. So I did what everybody else did. I decided, what I liked. I'm not sure it was a zone of excellence for me. I don't think it was a zone of genius for me. And I was good at it. And I wound up working my way up to I worked in government for a while, private industry, then government, then private industry again. And I wound up becoming the chief science officer of an international company based in New York City. It was an architecture and engineering firm. And at one point, we had the tallest building in the world in Shanghai. And by the time I was 39 years old, I was already burning out. It was hard work. It was demanding. But I was a man that valued his family, I'm a very, very, very curious person. So I like the time to explore. And I didn't have any time for any of that. And I was burning out. But then something happened. I became the top producer in the firm. And yet I never sold a thing. And people look at me, Gary, and they say, well, wait a minute, slow down. How do you become the top producer and not sell a thing? And that brings me to a story about that home that I was raised in. So I grew up, Gary, in this magical home. My parents were madly in love. My grandparents the same, and they came over every day. And my brother and I were the center of the universe. It was love everywhere. But more than that, my parents completely lived their lives in service, and it was not connected to an organized religion or faith. It was just who they were. And my home was Grand Central Station for anybody that needed a meal, a place to stay. It was the place of joy, love, laughter, and safety for the world. It was the hub. My friends, everybody, we all hung out there. My mother fed the world, and I thought all this was normal. What did I know? And it wasn't until I was ejected from the bubble and went to college that I learned two things very quickly. One, the world was not what I thought it was. And two, that my parents were heroes. And I didn't know. And it got me to realize that I needed to decide who I was. And this was some of the conversation that we had earlier, is most people, when you ask them who they are, they tell you what they are. They don't tell you who they are because they don't really, really know. And I knew I had a decision to make, that I needed to decide that I was either going to be entitled, because my dad was also a dentist. And I grew up around all this incredible, magical stuff, or that I should pay it forward and also live my life in service. So I decided that's what I wanted. I wanted to live my life in service. So don't think I forgot about this, tying this to how I became the top producer. So one of the things I learned, well, before I even say that, I didn't have a way to replicate what my parents did. I didn't have a home at the time. I couldn't feed all these people. That I developed this metric that I was going to live by every day. And so here's what I did. And a few books have validated that for me. One is called Never Eat Alone. And the other was called The Go-Giver, where every day, on average, I had a coffee, breakfast, lunch, or Zoom every day with somebody who I'd not met or would like to, or reconnect with somebody, or somebody I was introduced to. And then on average every day, I would average 5 introductions, 5 ways to help them every day, to serve them. What's key about this is that I never showed up. Everybody that meets for coffee at business or whatever, or a networking event, everybody has this radio station in their head, WIIFM, what's in it for me? Even if it's distant, it's there. And I learned in that home, no. You show up, you leave that transactional mindset at the door, and you show up to serve, and that's it. And when you do that, it changes the very nature of the questions that you ask. It changes the very trajectory of the conversation and the relationship that you develop. It becomes more genuine, more authentic, it lasts longer. And oh, by the way, it becomes more fruitful. I showed up, Gary, simply to touch their life. And when you ask the right questions, when you find out what people, besides maybe their family, their friends, their career, what they really, really, really give a shit about, and you go the extra mile to help them touch their life in that way, all I can tell you, Gary, is there is nothing to sell. Nothing. Because you've touched their life, and all they want to do is return something. And I'm like, look, that's not what I showed up for. And they're like, well, let me at least introduce you to this person. So then you start getting introduced to more and more important people. And next thing you know, you're in the upper echelon and you're touching all their lives. And I became a top producer and never sold a damn thing. All I was doing was what I learned in that house. That was it. But I did it every day, every single day for 30 years. 30 years. And what came back would take us many podcast episodes of stories that I could tell you. And that's when, after that, I went into business for myself. I got lucky, and then built a big business. And then after that, I really wanted to do something that was related to this, to what this nebulous ball of magic that was being created through service. And that led me to this path of, well, I had spent 10 years really learning who I was and going deep down that rabbit hole of how to better be, not just how to better do. Everybody's focused on doing, not being. And I became very focused on being. How can I better be for this, for that? And it made me a better server, that I could serve with much greater power and efficiency. And now I'm considered a thought leader in the world in servant leadership. I've had some incredible keynote speaking opportunities. I'm a leadership development consultant. Effectively, I'm in the organizational behavioral change business. I help people become more aligned with their lives and their work. And I've developed an organization called the Secret Sauce Society in Phoenix, which is an organization for servant-hearted leaders that want what we just spoke of. And we have events and memberships and masterminds. I have national sponsors. So I'm now in my zone of genius, not my zone of excellence. This is what I was meant to do. And I've got to say, Gary, I suck at a lot of things, but I'm a badass at this. And so I think that's a pretty much of a simple.
I think you, and you touched on so many different things. I think you and I were raised in very similar households. My dad was in the real estate and insurance business, and he was in it more from the standpoint of helping people, especially with their insurance needs. But his attitude always was, if you have a capability of doing something for someone else and you have an opportunity to do it, forget what's in it for you. Just go and do it. He was an early believer, taught us a lot about karma. Things will come back, but you don't know where. When I finally started to figure out my path as a financial advisor, I realized that the closer bonds I could forge with my clients that were non-market related, non-performance or financially related, the more enriched I could make my life as well as theirs. So
Exactly.
when I work with senior advisors, I mean, these are people that are incredibly successful by any measure. A lot of former colleagues of mine that I trained when they were early on, I always ask them, if we were to contact this client and we were to ask them to rate whether or not you rendered exceptional service, what would they say? And if the FA comes back and says, well, I'm really not sure, I said, well, that's a problem. Because what it means is you're probably touching them once or twice a year if they don't call. But when's the last time you called them to see how they were? When's the last time you called them to just check in and see how their kids were doing? Or just called them and let them know you were thinking about them? Or called them and said, is there anything we're doing currently that we could be doing better to help you more? Is there anything we're not doing you'd like to see us do? I said, I built my book on those phone calls. And I never lost a client. And I was always maybe not top of mind for the people I cared about, but pretty close to it. And just as you said, all of a sudden you're introduced to other people who aren't looking for somebody with a good take on some investment. They're looking for somebody that really cares, that actually gives a shit.
Thank
And
you.
I
Which,
try
by
and
the way, I call GAS. I've made an acronym.
go
I call
ahead.
it GAS.
I got it. I like that. But I couldn't agree more. And then you don't have to attribute some thought to a transactional outcome. Have faith in the fact that if you're occupying the position that you're currently doing and you know it's right for you and you're leaving it better than you found it, it's going to work out just fine.
But it takes fundamentally, Gary, to get there to really know who you are and what you're really here for. And it comes more from a consciousness of being than doing.
Yes.
Who do you want to be? How do you want to be that person? And I don't think too many people think about it. They really think all about the doing. And I dedicated a large part of my life to this being aspect. And it not only changed my life, but it has given me a life back. Look, at the end of the day, Gary, what everybody really wants is happiness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you focus on these things that we're talking about, happiness is not something you even have to seek. It has a way of finding you.
That's true.
And that's what happened for me. So I may be, yes, successful, but I'm a person that has his cake and eat it too. I'm maybe one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. Is everything
except for the Jets.
Except for the Jets. I mean, is everything in my life perfect? No. Am I happy? Oh my God. Because my life has purpose. It has meaning,
Yep.
it has fulfillment. It's filled with beautiful memories. God forbid, Gary, when you're on your deathbed, you're not thinking about the big sale you made, the big book of business, the big home, the nice car. You're thinking about the people that mattered most in your life, the moments you shared with them, and the transfer of love, joy, laughter that you've transferred. That, you know, the greatest currency we have, Gary, is not money, it's relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Not transactional based ones, but authentic ones.
And we live in a time where there's so much connotation, so much inference about really what that means, both from a leadership perspective, and really from almost a divisive perspective, because we seem to be in much more opinionated times. When you're doing a keynote, when you've got people in there that are probably on the right, the middle, the left, independent, conspiracy theories, which you're going to find in any large group, how do you navigate those occasional parochial beliefs where you've realized the person you're talking to isn't really open to anything other than the fact that they might just want to ask a question to see if they can throw you off, or they might want to show their buddies on the opposite side of the spectrum how smart they are. Talk to me about managing in those larger groups and how you handle the questions, because you're speaking to some high-powered people, but they all don't look at the world the same way.
It's so true. One of the things I always say is that 90% of all leaders are actually not. They're just people in positions of authority. And leadership is not the exercise of authority, Gary. It's the exercise of influence. And what more powerful way is there to influence somebody than through love, listening, understanding, kindness, these are the principles of servant leadership. You want people to really have your back. You want people to really go the extra mile. You want people to really have gas, give a shit. This is the essence of leadership. And, it's not taught in school. It's not something that many are taught in the home. Most people think leadership is authority, and authority does work. It's not as sustainable. It's not as profitable, but it does work. But it's not the highest form of leadership. And this was something that I had realized when I started, in my story in the home, and I started being this person as a leader, where as a leader, I wanted to touch everybody's life, not just give them a paycheck.
I'm sorry, please continue. I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't much more to say other than, I showed up every day where like, whose life can I touch today? Rather than what can I get out of this person today?
You bring up something that, again, there's so many corollaries because we're both in the relationship business. Because the things that we present, the things that we believe in, are not necessarily things you can hold or touch. They're things that you develop over long periods of time, as I say, both graduates of the School of Hard Knocks. But everybody goes through hard knocks. The problem I see a lot of people facing is that they refuse to reflect on what those experiences have been, and they'll keep repeating them over and over again, much to their own detriment. It's not the definition of insanity. It's more rationalizing the concept of not taking the chance.
It's true. We all develop some semblance of a victimhood kind of a mindset that we have to protect ourselves, we have to be guarded, we have, we're just going to get hurt. And look, let's be real here. The true measure of the human being is revealed not when things are easy, but when they're hard.
Absolutely.
And the biggest complaint in corporate America, you can look it up, is that people are not being seen, heard, noticed, appreciated, listened to, understood. Well, when everything's going good, the chances of you being seen, heard, noticed, appreciated, understood is not nearly as great as when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
And how you behave when shit hits the fan is how you really will be seen and get ahead. And behavior is the operative word. And that was what we had discussed prior to the lights going on for this show, right? Is I always ask people in your role at wherever you are, what is your single greatest responsibility? And everybody's answer is always, well, it's something related to what they're doing. It's nothing related to how they're being. And I always say, okay, I have a better answer than you. Your single greatest responsibility is your behavior, how you're behaving in the journey in creating those results. Are you lifting people up? Are you helping making them the best they can be? Are you showing up for them in the ways they need to show? You need to show up for them. Are you setting them up for success? Are you helping them when they're down? We've created a false narrative in business. They say life is not about the destination, it's about the journey. But somehow in business, we think business is only about the destination, the results, and not the journey. And I raise the bullshit flag. The real truth, Gary, is that there's two bottom lines, not one. There's the bottom line, and there's how you get to the bottom line. And how you get there is just as important as getting there. And that's how you and your organization behaves.
You're digging into areas of the human mind that we talk about rationalization, but it really gets into the concept of cognitive dissonance, if you think about it, because they can agree with everything you're saying and then go out and exhibit the opposite behavior because that's habitual and it's easier to rationalize. Quitting smoking, you smoke too much, you'll die. People know that, but they still smoke. Well, fine. So we know it's this, but I'm going to do that instead. In my world, we have people on a typical advisor's book, a senior advisor who might be running $300, $400, $500 million in assets and making a lot of money for themselves, but doing a good job. They're going to have clients that fall into two categories. They're going to have clients that follow their advice because they've told the advisor everything they need to know, and the advisor really enjoys working with them. And if you track their performance, not their relative performance, their performance relative to goals that matter to them, not some index. Those clients, by and large, are far more successful than clients that may listen to you some of the time or not at all. They call their own shots. So the question I pose to these very senior people is, if you can factually state that the people that follow your hard-earned wisdom, guidance, and advice end up much more successful financially than people that only listen to you some of the time or a little bit of the time, and you end up spending a disproportionate amount of time selling and reselling to them, and the other people, it just feels like it's not even work. Why do you have this other group? And it's kind of a hem and a haw, and it's this and that. And I just look at them, I said, who do you want to be? What do you want to be known for? Because we can identify them. And that second group, there may be good assets there, but there's a lot of aggravation. There's lack of trust. Why do you accept it? They have a really hard time letting go.
And they look, you said it. Who do you want to be? That's base camp, right? And most people haven't set up tent for base camp. They haven't. It all starts, well, who are you? Who do you want to be? And you start climbing the stairs. Okay, well, this is who I am. Like if you ask me who I am, my name's Andrew. I live my life in service to my family, to my friends, to my colleagues, and to my community. And everything that I do in my life is based on that service. And it's not just to them, it's also to myself, my own growth, so that I can even serve them better. And what does that mean? Well, it means better listening. It means all those other tools that we put in our tool belt, but it started from who I am. And then I realized, okay, I need to improve these skills to match and align myself with who I am. I need to develop these skills to match and align myself to who I am. And then when you start doing that, and you start, it becomes so much a part of you, it comes out in words. And then when it comes out in words, you start attracting more of those people that are attracted to what you're saying. And then that's how you develop those people around you. You attract, or as some people like to say, manifest those things around them. But it starts with being, not doing, being. I'm working on my second book, Yari, and the title of the book is called How to Better Be, a Blueprint for Leaders and Life Livers. Because most people really struggle at base camp. They want to like, okay, how do I get to this alignment thing? How do I I want to have my cake and eat it too, right? I'll work hard, but I want it to be fulfilling. I want it to be meaningful. I want it to be aligned with who I am and my family and how I want to live my life. And, this is the work that usually good coaches, which is part of what I do, and created now an organization and mastermind groups to help people do. And, it's amazing how happiness just has a way of finding you when you put in that work.
It's true. I think you and I agree. You haven't said one thing I could disagree with. And in my own experience, I think about how your words have resonated throughout my journey as well. And it's unusual and it's enriching. And it's just, I'm just so glad that we kind of ran into each other. When I think through this concept of a journey, and yeah, the pleasure and the discoveries in the journey, I think it from the standpoint of learning and curiosity, which go hand in hand. Um, Several years ago, since when I moved to Colorado, about 7 years ago, I became a ski instructor at Vail.
Oh, wow.
And when they asked me why I wanted to do it, the wrong answer would have been because I love skiing and I want to ski for free. But the answer I gave was I remember vividly when I started to learn how exciting it was to get better. And every time I went skiing, I wanted to learn something new. And I realized I had a smile on my face every time. I'd like to put that smile on other people's faces. And I didn't realize at the time that was absolutely the right answer. My wife, Lainey, applied, wrote her letter in. She got hired that day. It was the same thing because there's a lot of joy in, as you call, servant leadership, but putting people in a position where they can discover things about themselves they didn't know before,
And you know what I
which are
call
going to
that?
resonate forever.
You know what I call that, Gary? And I have this newsletter in LinkedIn called The Conscious Leader. It used to be called The Servant Leader, and I changed it because I realized that a lot of people never heard of servant leadership and they thought it was connected to a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I arrived at this word, conscious leadership. And I wrote an article that speaks to what you just said, is skiing for you is a happy place. And as a coach, I always try to make sure that people are regularly going to a happy place where you almost organically, you don't think about, oh my God, I got to do this, I got to do that. You don't even think to check your email or your texts. You're just naturally present and in the moment. And that's what skiing does for you. You are so naturally present. And when you're naturally present in that moment, that's when you're being just with yourself. And that's where you recharge your batteries. That's where you come to greater new discoveries. And I often encourage people to find a happy place, spend some time in it regularly. Yes, we can make ourselves go there. There's things called meditation and other things. But it is so important to kind of just disconnect. One of the laws of the spiritual laws of success is called the law of detachment. And if you think about it, Gary, well, the Buddha said, all suffering comes from attachment. Now, I'm not a Buddhist, but we must recognize that Buddha was a pretty rad dude. And it's so true. And we have to observe all the things that we're attached to in our lives, some that are healthy and some that are not.
You are spot on. I'm going to take a shot here and say that when I'm speaking, when I'm in front of a group, the happiest I can possibly be is when I see someone who arrived that morning skeptical, wanting to be anyplace else, and I see that dawn of recognition that what we're discussing and what we're describing isn't just a transfer of domain knowledge. It's taking that introspective trip and recognizing that there are pathways for people to accomplish things they never thought, and they start to see that application. They're like, all of a sudden they're writing down, they're paying attention, and I'm like,
Yes.
I got you.
And this is how, when I write and speak, as I was telling you, most people who speak and write in business do so to inform. And I would say the far majority, where I do not. Well, I do, but very, very little. What I do is I use, instead of give information, I use information to make people think, and make them think so much that they may even challenge their own beliefs. And as we did previously discussed prior to the light going on, that's something we should be doing on a pretty regular basis.
And I think you and I would both define that personally when we're in that situation. That's fun. That is fun.
That
it's
is.
It's
and,
so deeply satisfying.
If you want, the audience who's listening, you want more meaning, you want more fulfillment, you want to be aligned, you want these things that we're talking about, you have to do this work on yourself. Something I always say, and I'm going to point to you, Gary, but I really mean everybody. Your career, your business will only ever be about as good as you are. And as good as you are is as good as it's ever going to get. Yet what society will tell you, it's all about it and what you can do for it. You need money for it, people for it, technology for it, training for it. List is endless and what you need for it. However, the happiest, most successful people you will ever meet are working on themselves almost as much as they're working on it.
And I would venture to say that work never stops, because there's always
Never.
more to learn.
I need many lifetimes, brother.
Andrew, this has been an absolute joy. I can't thank you enough. It's I feel like we've known each other a lot longer than a couple hours, and it's just wonderful to talk to you. And again, tell me how people find you. How do they book you? Where should they go?
So the best way to find me, there's two ways. You can go, my last name is Kolikoff. It's Kolikoff, 2 F's like Frank. You can go to kolikoff.com. That's my business website. Really, the best way is look me up in LinkedIn. I've maxed out in LinkedIn. I think you max out at 30,000 connections, and I have, because I've been writing these articles for years, and I have followers all over the world. Check out some of my articles, say hello, introduce yourself, connect with me. And I also run this organization called the Secret Sauce Society. It's called that because what we're talking about is the secret sauce, right? That people aren't really talking about, like how I became the top producer and never sold a thing. And people like, that doesn't make sense. But then when I tell them, they're like, wait a minute, it does. I'm like, yes. So it's you have to put in the word thesecretsaucesociety.com. Right now, it's a Phoenix-based organization. However, we are setting up virtual mastermind groups for people who are hungry for the things that Gary and I just shared. And then lastly, I'll say this. If you're someone who's stuck, needs a boost, needs advice, needs help, or knows somebody that needs help in some way, reach out to me. I live my life in service. You might be surprised how I might be able to help you or your friend or your child. This is what I've been put here to do. So don't be shy. One thing I had to learn as a leader was to know to ask for help. I thought it was a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. Asking for help takes courage, man. It does. So those are the easiest ways to find me. And Gary, I had no idea what I was stepping into. I've been on many podcasts, and this has been the most enjoyable podcast guest experience.
That's very, very
I
kind
have
of you.
had.
And I have to tell you, I don't do this big advanced prep thing. I do some to make sure I can pronounce your name correctly. I get a little bit of background. And then I think just the concept of discovery for me is really joyful to see where it goes. And you have been an absolute pleasure to talk to. And I hope we get
Even though I'm a Jets fan.
Listen, I'll share the wealth. At least it's green like the birds. So
the Eagles, bah.
Folks, you've been listening to If the Public Only Knew. My guest today, wonderful gentleman, Andrew Kolikoff. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. Andrew, thank you once again for joining.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.